Well, congratulations. You have now sewn half the pattern pieces together. We've got 4 more pattern pieces to go. 2 of them are the collar, and we're about to do that right away. Then you've got your sleeves, and then we're almost done. This is how quick it goes once you start putting the actual garment together. So we're going to put the collar on. This takes sometimes as much time as it takes to make the whole kimono as far as garment construction goes. So this is the longest part, but it isn't that hard because you've done all the work ahead of time and you've done all your markings already. So I'm going to show you how to attach the collar, and the first thing to do is to pin it a lot. The front extensions are attached, and you can see why we did that earlier, because it's all pulling a bit and it's twisting. This is why we did all this marking before. Now you can see also I've made the slashes. So I came in at the katayama, so at this fold line that we've made and we've marked 1,000,000 times, and I've slashed in to the 10cm or 4-inch mark, and I've done that on the other side. That's all marked in the PDF, so we're slashing into there. Then I've slashed from here down in towards this curved line that we made. I've slashed once and twice, and I've done the same on the other side. And you don't need to worry if these aren't symmetrical. They're just there so we can do this. So we can turn everything like this. You see this, the front extensions are now panning out that way, and I'm going to lift that and lift this here. Now this should look quite familiar if you're looking at your PDFs as well. This is how we attach the collar. So I'm going to put that there. This is basically where the sleeve is going to go, and this is why the sleeve hasn't been attached yet. And what we're trying to do is create the shape of the collar in as linear as possible a fashion. So you see, by slashing in at these points to create these teeth, and these are all fine, they're going to be fine there. I didn't go all the way to the line, so they're not going to tear too much, and we're about to sew it all together so it's not going to fall apart. You see there, that's the katayama, that's the shoulder mountain there, passing back that way, and this is the front extensions going that way. So we've completely twisted everything at a 90-degree angle, and we're about to put the collar in around here. And if you don't have these slashes, you can see how it pulls a bit. Now you can do it without the slashes, but this is the best way to put it together. I'm working from the right side of the fabric. This is the right side, this is the right side, this is the right side. This is the right side. I'm going to sew the collar to the right side of the garment first, to the outside of the garment. I've got the center of the collar here. So I put the collar on, I line that up there, and that's lined up with the center back neck. So what we need now is lots of pins. First thing I pin, so I pin it to the center back neck, pin the seam allowance. Bring your seam allowance forward, so it's just sitting on that line that you've made, because you're sewing, this is your seam allowance up until the line, between here and here. You don't want to catch any of that line in your sewing, you want to sew beyond that. So put a pin there and a pin there, and the reason I'm doing it this way is because the way you sew a collar on, and the way that we're going to pin the collar on, is you work from the center back out and the center back out. So I'm going to pin it that way, and then I'm going to sew it that way. You start here and move down, and then you finish this side second. You don't go all up and around in one go. It's a great way to do it because it means that there's less mistakes that can be made and sustained, because you're doing it bit by bit. And as you can see, it gets a little bit tricky because you're getting a straight piece of fabric to come around this corner. But it's possible, and we can do it. So now what it's about is maneuvering your fabric, get it into the right place, and we're going around this corner and not tucking the fabric. You don't want to tuck in this, you just want to guide it round and pin it in place. Sometimes if I've got a particularly tricky fabric, I might baste this in place as well, so before I actually put it under the machine or do my final stitches, I can see how it looks with a really light basting stitch into it, and see how everything's sitting and if it tucks. This is where it will tuck if it does tuck. That's the katayama right there, that's the shoulder. And so this is the part where you're turning around a corner. Once you've got to that corner, you're home free. So it's just about getting to there and then you're fine. Come around and nice and slow. See, I've put a tuck in there. And take out pins, put them back in, move them around with the garment. This is a moving feast, this is right now. Be especially careful here, because here you're going to be crossing this cut, and if you go too close to it, then that will end up being on the outside of the garment. You want the sewing to be passing past here. So you see I've got a good ½ centimetre before I hit that, and that is fine. I've come around the curve here, you can see that. And now I've got to the end of the curve there, and now it's about getting it straight and marrying it with where it's going to end down on the front extension here. So you can see you start to pull it straight here, and you have to get it to go from curving to come down and meet, while not pulling this fabric, because you're going to be sewing this. It's not the bias, it's the off grain. So the off grain is just as stretchy as the bias. The bias is a little bit more stretchy, but the off grain will stretch and pull. So you need to be able to pin this down with enough ease to sew it down, and so you're not pulling it like that and stretching the whole thing out of whack. So I will start by pinning down here, getting an idea of where we need to end, and then working throughout the middle and changing pins. Move the pins around. Just because you've put a pin in doesn't mean you can't move it. That's not the final place. Move the pins and just gently work your way down. Now I'll pin this in place here. Then I'll show you a little problem that does crop up. Is you see this seam, we're pressing that open, and that's how we want it to end as well, is we want that seam to be open. But here it's flipped underneath. So I'm going to take that pin out and make sure the seam is in the correct state to then be passed across with a stitch, because otherwise you're going to, when sewing the collar on, you're going to sew that seam closed and it's going to twist as it goes up the garment. So make sure your seams are flat and in the position that they should be once the garment's finished. And it's good to pin along there as well, because that's going to keep that open. You can put some pins down there if you want. So I pinned that side, I'm going to move on to the other one. You cannot put too many pins in. Put as many as you need to feel confident about doing this. Hold it in place. It's more important than how many pins you use. So I've got that all ready. I'm going to change out the bobbin because it's nearly done. Remember I said that we had to check. So I'm going to have a look at the bobbin and then we're going to go and sew. Brilliant. So I don't need to change the bobbin just yet. Famous last words. But can you see in there? So I'm now at the point of attaching the collar to the body, and I'm nearly out, but that's going to cover enough for one pass of the collar, I would say. So I'm gingerly picking this up, and I'm coming to the center front. I'm going to put it underneath the machine. Drop it down in place. I want to get about the center, nearly to the edge where the fold is, because you want a nice buffer zone between that and these slash marks. And then just gingerly bring all the pieces into place. Make sure you've got everything that should be going under the machine goes under the machine, and look for tucks. And then you do this nice and slowly. Do it slow, and you should only have to do it once. And don't worry if you have to do it again, because you can. So I'll start with back stitch and just slowly come around. So from here to the end of this curve, about here, so you can see that last slash mark, and then it goes straight. This is where you really need to hold the fabric up and be checking on this part as well. Look for little signs like this, that you've got puckers and tucks, and just hold it underneath with your thumb and pass it through. And then once you get to this part, you're outside the curve, then you've got a straight line. So then what it's about is maintaining the correct tension to not stretch the fabric, because you're on a cross grain. You're not on a cross grain, you're on an off grain, and there's a real opportunity to stretch the fabric because you're not on a straight or a cross. So nice and slow, you're not in a rush. Move all your fabric around. Stop everything. Move all your fabric around. Pay attention to everything. And take your time. So you see here, I've just entered the straight out of the curve. Now what I need to make sure that I have this seam open when I pass across it. In this case, I am actually going to pin that in place. So I know where I am when I'm about to pass across it, and I can check that it's in the right spot. And now it's making sure I don't do that. Look at how stretched that is. There's so much elasticity because you're on the off grain. So you just come in nice and gently. Check that everything's in position. If you feel a crease, find out what it is. Don't just let it go past. Slowly work down. This is quite good fabric for this because I can see through it as well. So here I am, I'm now at my seam of the front extension and the body. I'll take that little pin out. And just double check underneath that everything's sitting in the right place. I can see it there. There's one seeing it. There's one enclosure. There's the other. And off we go. Nice and slow. So I'm coming down to this part now. This I put in place as we were pinning, and I'm close enough. I'll put down my foot, that might help. So what I want to do is get this to sit right on the edge there. So when I come back in, I'm going to do a top stitch over when I close this collar, and I want this to be underneath where I'm going to go. It'll be slightly curved there. So you can pin this, but it's so cumbersome it might be easier just to place the line, turn that in a bit, and then sew down like that. You can see what's happening when I go under the light. So that's where the two meet. You can see that blue dot where I was sewing from. Sew to there, and back stitch, put it back in. I'll do a couple of back stitches. This is one of the highest stressed areas of the whole garment. So I put a couple of back stitches in. Sometimes it's a good practice to actually not just back stitch, but get in there with a hand sew a little safety stitch in there as well, because it's a very high use part of the garment, a high stress part that can come apart quite easily. So you'll see this will fold under, and that is going to go over the top when we come back round and just straddle that, and that's going to look fantastic. But I'm going to go do the other side, and then we'll press it and come back to close the collar as well. Best way to show you this is to actually hold the camera and run you through it. Now this will look familiar from the PDF. We have a collar attached with the seam here, and we're yet to put the collar in. You can see the symmetry here. You have your front extensions. There's the end of the front of the garment. Here's the back of the garment falling away, and here's the centre back neck. What we need to do is close the collar. And you can see what happens. We've got all these bits that we haven't taken off. Remember, we don't subtract from the fabric. In this case, we incorporate it into the collar. And this is one of my favourite things about making a Japanese yukata or a kimono. Is what we're going to do is fold these bits in a beautiful way as well. So they'll fold neatly along this pressed line, which is the peak of the collar, the halfway point of the collar, and then all of that becomes enclosed. And I'm going to press it properly, but I just want to show you what we're actually, the concept of what we're doing. So you can see I'm folding these things down so they sit within the seam of the first seam of the collar and within the halfway point of the collar, so then I can pull the actual collar. And when we close it, everything sits within. And you might think, well, why don't we just cut those bits off? How silly. You could cut all these bits off and just sew a collar around. And I've done that because I thought, well, I don't need to fold everything up and sort of stuff it into the collar like this. But what you end up with is quite a sort of a limp collar. This gives the collar body. You can see there already how lovely with the tomo airy, and then you've got the little patch up here at the centre back neck. How much bite it gives your collar. And when it's not there, it's just two pieces, especially on a thin fabric like this. You get to see these little strips coming up through the collar. You might want to line it if you don't like to see those, but I think they're lovely. So this is how we close the collar. Now I'm going to do it nice and neatly and then I'll show you. But I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're about to do. And if I said before, if you were intending on putting a coat loop in, this is where you would do it. You would have it beautiful and centered and everything there. You would put it here, so then, well, it would already be attached to the center back neck here on the inside of the fabric, on the wrong side, and then you would have passed it once when you put the collar on first, and then you would have passed it twice once the collar's attached. But we're not doing that. We're going to carry on with the nice simple version. But you can see that coming together. Once this is done, all you have to do is put your seams on, do the side seams, and hem the garment, and you're finished. It comes together quickly. So I'm going to press this, I'm going to show you how I press it, and then we're going to close the collar. I've just moved the camera, as you can see, to up above me, so you can see in detail what I'm doing here. Right, I'm going to show you explain the anatomy again of the kimono, of this garment, this yukata. And this way I can show you exactly how I press it without having to hold the camera as well. So I've got it up above and hopefully you can see all this. Yes, you can. Fantastic. Alright, so we can see here, this is centre back neck. This is the collar, this is the midpoint of the collar, and here is the collar as it heads towards the edge of the front extension, which is just there. I might just push this in a bit. There we go. There's the edge of the front extension. And so, like I said, what we're doing is closing this over, keeping all these things. This is where the sleeve will attach, out of the way. You can see here, this is the seam between the front extension and the front of the garment, and the garment winds up and goes around down here. That's what this corner is. This pleat that we have is the body piece heading around and back down along the centre back seam. So at the moment it's at a T shape. In the PDF you'll see this T shape where it's splayed out like the Angel of the North. For all those British people who know what that is, it's a big statue that holds its arms out in Newcastle. So, the way to do this is, you've got your line here that was made when you pressed the collar, you created this crease. And I've sewn it to the outside first, and I'm just going to come in and make sure that I've got all of this is nicely pressed. This is a bit delicate. You can see I've already burnt myself. Coming in, and this is the most delicate part, because what you're trying to do is maintain a little bit of distance between the stitching and the fold of the seam where you have joined your collar to the garment. So, oh, that's steamy. Very good iron. So you can see here, I've got a couple of mil. If I flip this over, I've got that little lift there. And this is really important if you want to have no top stitching. I'm going to do a top stitch because there's going to be top stitches. There's already top stitching down here on the center front opening, so the front of the front extensions, and there's going to be top stitching on the cuffs. So it's okay. if you want to eliminate top stitching, and especially around the collar, so it's like my yukata is, this is hand sewn, so it's hand sewn both sides. But if you want it like this, so there's no top stitching down the way, this is where you do your ditch stitch, and this is where this is important, making sure that you've pressed this with a little bit of an overlap. So when it comes to sewing this side down, we can pin this in place, and you pin it, if you're doing it in that way, you pin it a little bit beyond where you can see the edge of the collar attached to the other side, and we come in and do a regular ditch stitch. So you would pull this back a bit and stitch in the ditch, which is catching it on the way through. What I'm going to do is turn it, and I'm going to press it so it's even, and then I'm going to stitch it from the outside, but as a top stitch down the edge, so an edge stitch down the edge of where the collar meets the body on the outside, and that will catch the collar on the inside. Hopefully. It usually does. So that is why you have to press it this way, and just keep everything, you don't press it so the seam is exactly split right at the part. You always have just a little bit of an overlap because it's useful to do so. So we go back to folding this. We've got the center line there, and you're going to make this beautiful as well, especially on a garment as thin, as gauzy and gossamer as this, with this cotton voile. You want to make it beautiful. You don't just want to sort of scrunch it up and stuff it in. You need to place it, and you need to have it so it folds. It should fold, what's that? That's once, and then this is twice. And you see what I've done there? I've got it now, there's the seam, and then there's the midpoint. And if I pull this across, always test it, because you never know, it might sort of, especially down here, you want that lovely line to come up to the peak and then head back in. Again, if you're using a lining on this, on the collar, or you're using a thicker fabric, this won't be as big a point, but it still is. The best practice is to make it beautiful and neat. And then you can see here where the end of the front piece of the body piece just tails off, and just there you can see it's just coming into the peak, so you just fold that back nice and neatly. See, so we're fitting it beautifully within the collar, not stuffing it in. And take note of how you did it on this side, so you can repeat the same pattern with the piece on that side. And once you've got it into a position that you're happy with, then we press. So the collar is back. I've got all the collar back there. What I'm doing is pressing all this, do you know, I don't know what you would call it. What would you call it? The stuff going inside the collar. I bet you there's a Japanese name. In fact, I know there is, but it escapes me right now. This is I usually refer to it as the excess, which isn't a lovely term, but it describes it well. Don't worry about if you've caught this. You've got a big iron. This is why they use those lovely tiny irons in Japan. This can all be fixed. Pressing that out. The main thing is that you've got, look how beautiful and neat that is. That is flat. And now when I pull this down, and once I've done the other side, I'll pin this in place. And then we're going to be ready to sew the collar down. And then, I don't say you're done, but this is, now you've just got a couple of straight seams to sew, a couple of things to attach and to fix up, and you're getting very close to having your yukata finished, or your kimono style garment. So you see there, I'm just getting everything ready. So this isn't sewn, it isn't pinned. I'm just making sure it all sits beautifully, and especially I want to take care to press this. You see how I'm pulling that? So it comes across, it's going to curve, but it is straight. And I want to get this straight because this part, when you're sewing it, you're going around a corner. So you want to make sure that this is meeting there perfectly, because you're sewing from the other side. You're not going to be seeing this, but you want to catch this on the edge. So it's best to get the sewing done, it's best to get the pressing done well now. The more you press and the more you prepare now, like the rest of the garment, the more you do now saves you heartache and stress later. Now, one little thing that I do use when I'm doing this, of course you don't need one, you can pin without this, but I use this or a piece of cardboard. You could use your a notepad that you've got and just slip that in underneath. And the purpose of it is, because I'm on an ironing board, is so I can pin. So I'm going to pin here, but these aren't going to stay in. What I want is them just to hold it in place while I do the other side. And I'm going to remove these, but you can see what I'm doing. So I'm not pinning it to the board. I'm not pinning it to the ironing board. It just helps so I don't pin it to that. This is all placemaking. You're putting it in its place. This is where it's all going to go, but it's not prepared yet, because you'll see in a second that it would all fall out of place because you do this and you move it all along and it all folds and wraps. So keep that like that. We don't need to do any more preparation on that until we finish this side, and then we're going to flip it over and make sure we check that the seam is nice, that's attached to the body. All that stuff will happen next. You see how it goes nice and straight, but obviously it's on a curve. This is why this takes more time to prepare and to make than the entire garment. So sewing the collar on takes as long as it takes to sew all the other parts of the garment together. The centre back seam, the front extensions, the side seams, the sleeves and the hem. They're all quite straightforward and easy. They're just straight lines and you press them open. This is the one that takes the finessing, because this is where it all happens. Everything else is just a square. But it's doable, and it's beautiful when you do it right. So I prepared this earlier, but I thought it'd be better to get the camera shot. So it's all gone the other way now, and we'll redo it. So I'm following this, keeping this lovely and straight. Can you see that there? Yeah. So this is the outer edge of the front extension, and I bring it up to here and then hold it in place, and then get this nice and straight, like a sail. Look at that. See how it turned into a triangle down there? Get that beautiful, and then I bring this piece up, so that's now folded across the seam, and I bring this up to within the seam, not at the seam, within the seam, just in case. You want it back, because you're going to be sewing along here and it will create more bulk. And then I'll just bring this one down a little bit. You know, that one will fold with the whole piece when you do it, but it's better to do it now, because it means that you're not forcing something and then this is going to get bunched up. Get it prepared now and it'll be beautiful later. Come in. Make this absolutely gorgeous, especially if you're using a thin fabric, because you are going to see it. It's part of the garment. Oh, that got my glasses then. I was blinded by the steam. There we go. And then I'm going to bring this across. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll get this in place nice and ready. And don't drag it across. You're not forcing stuff to happen, you're allowing it to happen. Take your time. No one is rushing you. Well, I hope they're not. No one's rushing me. I'm taking my time because the rest of the garment is so simple and I want to get this right. Like when we were pinning the collar on in the first place, everything was just moving pins around. You're just patting things into place. It's a lovely thing to do. And when I hand sew these, the entire process is a meditation, because at no point do you really speed up when you're hand sewing everything. I would baste it down, baste the collars down, and then you come in with a beautiful little slip stitch underneath, and it takes a month to make one at the speed I sew. It probably should take me less time, but especially doing these, I hand sew these down, then I anchor them to the body. It's so much fun if you have the time and you have the patience. It's the thing that I kind of lack. It's just a lovely, calming thing to do. And these boards are great, but you don't have to go out and buy one of these boards. A book, anything will work. If you've got a credit card, put it directly underneath where you're about to pin and just pin. You don't need to buy more stuff. You have everything you need at home. There we go. So it's just pinned to sort of hold it in place. I'm going to give it another quick just blast with the steam. Make sure everything's lining up. This is now all secured in place. Give it a good press. And I'll get a really good pressing once all the pins are out, which are causing it to shrink a little bit, which is causing this ripple effect, because the pins are holding it in place in places and confusing the fabric. That's all that's happening. Nothing to worry about. But I just want to get this crisp, because we're going to sew, and we're sewing around corners. I'm going to take the pins out and then put them back in. Alright, so here we go. Just like sewing the inside of it, we don't start at the end of the collar, you start at the center of the collar. So center back neck. And I'm going to work down this way, and I'm going to turn it round and go back that way down the other side of the collar. The other way is a little bit irritating because all of it has to go up into this part of the sewing machine. So it does get a bit harder, especially if you're using thicker fabric. And if you want, you can come up from the other side. Honestly, if you want, you can sew the whole thing, so you go from one end to the other, but best practice is to start in the center back. And also that means if you're making a mistake, you're unpicking only half at a time. But everything does actually push through here, even with thicker fabric. It all sort of bunches up and can go through, because as you can see, we've got that T shape. There it is. Can you see that? So at no point is everything from the body of the yukata or the garment going to be bunched up in here. You'll always have a way to pull it to one side or the other. I'm going to sew from the center back with an edge stitch. So you see this part, I'm holding this up here, so it's going to pass around this corner. And once you get to about this pin here and you're on the straight, beautiful collar. Oh, it's looking good. Because we've folded in the excess into the collar, it's got the tomo airy, and it's also got that little patch, the extra patch that we used up underneath the center back. It is looking fantastic because we get a little window into the makings of it. I'll show you here. You can see that, and then it just goes into this gorgeous white, and the opaque white against the transparent body fabric is just, I love it. There you go. So you see, I pressed it from the back and then I pressed it from the front. You press it over and over again, just get out any roping that might have happened during the course of it, especially if you're using something really really fine like this. Now you can see that beautiful top stitch down the collar. Can you see that? There we go. Absolutely gorgeous.